He lost his sight in the line of duty, but somehow, the darkness wasn't the hardest thing he carried. The wind moved quietly through the pines outside the rescue center, carrying that faint scent of cold iron and wet earth that lingers in late October across northern Alberta, where the first frost settles before dawn and the air feels thinner, sharper, like it's holding its breath. Ethan Cole stood just inside the entrance, his gloved hand resting lightly on the aluminum handle of his white cane, the rubber tip tapping once against the polished concrete floor, then again, steady, measured, a rhythm learned not from confidence, but from necessity. He wasn't here because he trusted the system. He wasn't here because he believed a dog could fix what had been taken from him. He was here because silence had grown too loud in his apartment, because the nights stretched longer than they should, because even memory had begun to fade into something colder than grief. Somewhere down the corridor, a dog barked, sharp and restless, followed by another, then a chain of voices overlapping in unease, until a staff member murmured something low, trying to calm them, but the tension didn't leave, it just shifted, like snow sliding slowly off a roof. Ethan tilted his head slightly, listening, not just to the noise, but to what lived underneath it. He had spent years doing that. Listening for what people didn't say. The receptionist spoke gently, her voice warm in the way Canadians learn early, a kind of practiced kindness that doesn't push too far, just enough to make space. "We've got a few trained guide candidates available today," she said, careful with her words, as if placing them down between them. Ethan nodded once, but didn't move forward. "I'm not here for the easy ones," he replied, his voice quiet, steady, carrying that weight of someone who had once given orders and now rarely spoke at all. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Paper shifted somewhere behind the desk. A chair creaked. "There is one more," she said eventually, softer now. "But he's not in the program anymore." Ethan turned his face slightly toward her voice, though his eyes did not follow. "Why not?" Another pause. "He's been labeled aggressive. Retired police K9. Doberman. Failed reconditioning." The words hung there, clinical, distant, like a report written for someone who would never meet the subject. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Show me." The hallway stretched long and cool, the air changing as they moved deeper inside, carrying the layered scent of disinfectant, metal, and something older, something tired. The barking grew louder at first, then strangely quieter, as if one by one, the dogs sensed something unfamiliar passing by. Ethan's cane tapped against the floor, counting distance, mapping space, each step measured in centimeters, precise in a way that replaced sight with structure. They passed rows of kennels, the soft shuffle of paws, the occasional whine, the brush of fur against metal bars. Then, at the very end, the air changed again. Still. Heavy. No barking. No movement. Just presence. "He's in here," the staff member whispered, though there was no need to whisper. Ethan didn't respond right away. He stood there, feeling the space rather than seeing it, sensing the quiet the way a man senses weather before a storm. Inside the kennel, Rex didn't move. The Doberman stood in the shadows, lean and still, his black and rust coat absorbing the low fluorescent light, ears forward, body coiled not in aggression, but in memory. He smelled the man before he heard him. Cold air. Leather. Faint traces of something older. Smoke. Not fresh. Not recent. But real. The kind that doesn't wash out. Rex's breathing slowed. His head lowered, just slightly. Outside the kennel, Ethan stepped closer, ignoring the shift in tension behind him. "You don't have to open it," he said quietly. The staff member hesitated. "Sir, I really don't think it's all right." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Something in it carried a certainty that didn't come from confidence, but from recognition. Slowly, carefully, Ethan extended his hand forward into the empty space between him and the kennel door, fingers relaxed, palm open, offering nothing but presence. For a moment, nothing happened. The building hummed softly, the distant sounds fading into something almost like silence. Then, from the darkness, Rex stepped forward. One step. Then another. No growl. No bark. Just breath. He stopped inches from the bars, his nose lifting, drawing in the scent again, deeper this time, as if searching for something buried beneath years of commands and corrections and silence. Ethan didn't pull his hand back. He didn't speak. He just stood there. Steady, waiting. And for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt alone. The metal latch clicked softly as the staff member, against her better judgment, eased the kennel door open just a few centimeters, enough for possibility but not enough for certainty, and the air between them shifted, not with threat, but with something quieter, something older than fear, as Rex stepped closer, his paws soundless against the concrete, his body still held in that disciplined tension of a dog who had once known commands but no longer trusted them, and Ethan did not move, not an inch, his hands still extended, steady in the cold air, fingers slightly curled as if remembering something they had once held before everything changed, and for a long second, maybe longer, neither of them crossed that final distance, not yet, because some boundaries are not measured in meters, but in memory, and Rex lowered his head just enough for his nose to hover near Ethan's palm, drawing in the scent again, deeper now, searching past the surface of wool and leather and winter air, finding traces of something burned into skin and bone, something that spoke of long nights, of smoke that did not belong to a fireplace, of decisions that could not be undone, and Ethan felt it too, not through sight, but through the faint brush of breath against his fingers, warm and controlled, a living presence that did not rush him, did not demand, just existed, and his shoulders, which had carried years of invisible weight, lowered by the smallest fraction, as if his body recognized something his mind had not yet named, and behind him, the staff member held her breath, every instinct telling her to intervene, to pull him back, to remind him of the file, the warnings, the reports written in careful language that reduced a living creature to a list of risks, but she did not move, because something in the stillness held her in place, something that did not feel dangerous, just unfinished, and then, slowly, Rex closed the distance, his nose brushing against Ethan's hand, light at first. Testing, then pressing just enough to confirm that this was real, that this scent, this presence, was not another passing moment, and Ethan's fingers responded instinctively, not with control, not with training, but with memory, gently resting against the side of the dog's muzzle, feeling the warmth of fur, the subtle tremor beneath it, the quiet strength held in restraint, and there was no command spoken, no leash guiding the moment, just contact, simple and undeniable, and Rex exhaled, a long, quiet breath that seemed to carry more than air, as if something inside him had been held too tightly for too long and was finally being released, not completely, not yet, but enough to change the shape of the silence between them, and Ethan's voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. You are not what they say you are you? Not a question, not really, more like a recognition spoken out loud for the first time, and Rex did not move away, did not flinch, he stayed, his head slightly lowered, his body no longer coiled, just present, as if that single sentence had reached something no command ever had, and somewhere down the corridor, another dog barked, sharp and sudden, breaking the fragile stillness for a moment, but Rex did not react. Did not turn, his focus remaining where it was, on the man who did not see him, but somehow understood him, and the staff member finally let out a quiet breath, her voice softer now, almost uncertain. He has never done that before, and Ethan nodded faintly, his hand still resting where it had found its place. Maybe no one ever asked him to, and the words lingered in the air, not as defiance, but as truth. Simple and unadorned, and outside, beyond the walls of the shelter, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of distant snow, the kind that arrives without warning, covering everything in silence, not to erase what came before, but to give it a different ending, and inside that quiet space, between a man who had lost his sight and a dog who had lost his purpose, something small, almost invisible, began to take shape, not yet trust, not yet belonging, but something close enough to begin. The handler assigned to the far corridor arrived with quiet steps, boots soft against the concrete, a man in his early 50s named Daniel Mercer, his voice low and measured in the way of someone who had spent decades around working dogs and learned that control was never about volume, and he stopped a few paces behind Ethan, taking in the scene with a careful eye, not interrupting, not rushing, just observing the angle of Rex's posture, the set of his ears, the absence of tension where there should have been some, and that alone told him more than any report ever had. That dog has not stood like that in months, Daniel said quietly, not to challenge, but to understand, and Ethan did not turn, his hand still resting lightly against Rex's muzzle, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of breath. He is listening, Ethan replied, as if it were the simplest explanation in the world, and Daniel let out a faint breath, something close to a quiet agreement, though he would not say it yet, because men like him did not rush to conclusions, not when years of training had taught them that one moment could never tell the whole story. We can try a controlled walk, Daniel offered after a pause, short distance, 10 meters, no pressure, and the staff member hesitated, glancing between them, her concern still present but softened now by what she had witnessed, and Ethan nodded once, not eager, not afraid, just willing. Let him decide the pace, he said, and that was unusual, because most people asked how to control a dog, not how to follow one, but Daniel did not argue, he simply opened the kennel door fully this time, stepping back, giving space where it was needed, and Rex did not bolt, did not test the boundary, he stepped out slowly, each movement deliberate, his body no longer confined by metal but still carrying the memory of it, and for a moment he stood there, free in the open corridor, as if measuring the air, the distance, the meaning of being outside the place that had defined him for too long, and Ethan shifted his cane slightly, tapping once to find his orientation, then lowering it as his other hand hovered again, not searching blindly, but waiting, and Rex moved first, closing the small gap between them, his shoulder brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, not by accident, not by command, but by choice, and Daniel watched that contact carefully, because it was not the movement of a dog seeking dominance or distance, it was the movement of a dog aligning himself, positioning where he believed he belonged, and they began to walk, slowly at first, measured in centimeters, each step quiet. The sound of paws and boots blending into a steady rhythm that echoed softly down the corridor, and Ethan did not issue commands, did not pull, did not guide in the way instructors usually taught, he simply moved forward with intention, trusting the space ahead, trusting the presence beside him, and Rex adjusted without being told, matching pace, adjusting angle, his body subtly shifting to keep Ethan clear of the wall, of the corners, of the uneven patch where the floor met an older section of concrete, and Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, because what he was seeing did not fit the file, did not match the reports of unpredictability and failed conditioning. This was something else, something instinctive, something that could not be trained in a usual sense, and halfway down the corridor, Ethan paused, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something far beyond the building, though it was only the faint hum of heating vents and the distant sound of wind against the exterior walls. You used to do this, did you not? He said softly, not expecting an answer, and Rex's ears flicked once, a small movement, almost imperceptible, but enough, and Daniel stepped closer, just within speaking distance. He was part of a tactical unit, he said, voice low, respectful now, urban search, high-stress environments. He worked off signal more than voice, and Ethan nodded faintly. As if that explained everything. He still does, he replied, and they resumed walking, a little steadier now, the rhythm more certain, and for the first time since he had entered the building, Ethan's steps carried something different, not confidence, not yet, but direction, and Rex stayed beside him, not as a tool, not as a problem, but as something quietly becoming what he had always been meant to be, not dangerous, not broken, just waiting for someone who would not ask him to forget what he had survived. The corridor ended in a wider training room where the light changed, softer now, filtered through high windows dusted with the first thin layer of frost, and the space opened into something quieter, less confined, as if even the building itself allowed a breath to be taken there, and Ethan felt it without seeing, the shift in air, the way sound moved differently, no longer echoing sharply but settling into the room like snow on open ground, and Rex slowed slightly as they entered, not out of hesitation, but awareness, his head lifting, ears adjusting to the new space, reading it the way he once read unfamiliar terrain, and Daniel remained a few steps behind, arms loosely folded, not intervening, just watching with the careful patience of someone who understood that trust could not be instructed, only witnessed. We usually start with guided cues here, Daniel said quietly, more out of habit than expectation. And Ethan gave a faint shake of his head, his hand lowering from Rex's shoulder but not fully retreating. He already knows what to do, he replied, not with certainty, but with a calm that did not need proof, and Rex took 2 slow steps forward, then paused, glancing back briefly, not for permission, but to confirm presence, and Ethan followed, adjusting his pace by instinct, his cane now resting lightly against his leg. Unused but not discarded, a reminder of what he had learned to rely on. Before something else began to take shape, and the room held its silence as they moved, measured in small distances, each step no more than half a meter, deliberate, careful, and yet there was no tension, no sign of resistance, only a quiet alignment that felt less like training and more like memory resurfacing, and along the far wall stood a low platform, worn smooth from years of use, its edges marked with faint scratches that told stories of other dogs, other attempts, other endings, and Rex approached it without command, stepping up with a controlled motion, then turning slightly, positioning himself in a way that placed Ethan just clear of the edge, and Ethan stopped instinctively, his foot hovering just before the platform, sensing the change in space without needing to see it, and Daniel's breath caught for a moment, not from fear, but from recognition, because that was not random movement, that was precision, learned and lived, something that should not have remained after. Everything the reports claimed had been lost, and Ethan reached forward again, his fingers brushing the air before finding the edge of the platform, confirming what Rex had already shown him, and he let out a quiet breath, something close to relief, though he did not name it. You remember, he said softly, not to the room, not to Daniel, but to the presence beside him, and Rex stood still, steady, his body relaxed but alert, as if holding a position that meant more than just balance, and Daniel stepped closer now, just enough for his voice to carry without breaking the moment. He failed every structured test we gave him, he said, not as a defense, but as a confession, and Ethan nodded slightly, his hand resting once more against the dog's shoulder, feeling the strength there, the control, the absence of fear. Maybe he did not fail, Ethan replied. Maybe he refused to forget, and the words settled into the room with a weight that no report could carry, and for a moment, no one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because something had already been understood, and outside, beyond the frosted windows, the wind moved again through the pines, low and steady, carrying with it the quiet promise of winter, the kind that changes everything without asking permission. And inside that room, between a man who had learned to walk in darkness and a dog who had been left behind by a system that no longer understood him, a different kind of path was forming, not drawn in lines or commands, but in small, deliberate steps, measured not in meters, but in trust, the kind that does not arrive all at once, but builds slowly, quietly, until one day it feels like it was always there. The room remained quiet after that moment on the platform, but something had shifted, subtle and undeniable, like the first thin layer of ice forming over a lake before winter fully arrives, and Ethan stepped down slowly, his hand trailing lightly along Rex's shoulder as if memorizing the shape of him, not out of dependence, but recognition, and Rex adjusted again without being asked, moving half a step closer, his body angled just enough to guide without pressure, a quiet correction that spoke of instincts long buried but not erased, and Daniel exhaled slowly behind them, the sound almost lost in the stillness, because what he was witnessing did not belong to training manuals or evaluation charts, it belonged to something far less predictable, something that could not be measured in scores or commands completed. We should document this, the staff member whispered from the doorway, her voice careful, almost hesitant, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever was forming between them. But Daniel did not answer right away, his eyes still fixed on the pair, watching the way Rex held his position, the way Ethan moved without asking, and after a moment, he shook his head slightly. Not yet, he said, because some things, once written down, become confined again, reduced to something smaller than they are, and this, whatever it was, needed space to breathe, needed time to unfold without being labeled too soon. And Ethan turned his head slightly, catching the faint shift in their voices. He is not a report, he said quietly, and there was no accusation in it, just a statement, simple and firm, and Daniel nodded once, a small acknowledgement that carried more weight than agreement, because he had spent years trusting reports over instincts, and for the first time in a long while, he was beginning to question that balance, and Rex remained still beside Ethan, but his ears flicked once toward the hallway, catching something distant, a change in the rhythm of the building. Not loud, not urgent, just different, like a subtle shift in wind direction before a storm, and his body responded before thought could form, muscles tightening slightly, head lifting, attention drawn towards something unseen, and Ethan felt it immediately through the contact at his side, the slight change in posture, the tension that replaced calm. "What is it?" he murmured, not out of fear, but curiosity, and Rex did not move away. But he did not relax either, his focus fixed somewhere beyond the room, beyond the quiet safety they had found, and Daniel noticed it too, his brow narrowing as he listened, trying to separate the normal sounds of the facility from whatever had caught the dog's attention, and at first, there was nothing obvious, just the low hum of heating vents, the distant shuffle of movement, the soft echo of a door closing somewhere far down the corridor, but then, faintly, there was something else. Something irregular, a sharper edge to the air, a scent perhaps, or a vibration too subtle for human senses to register clearly, and Rex took one step forward, then stopped, as if weighing a decision, his training pulling one way, his uncertainty another, and Ethan did not pull him back, did not question the movement, he simply adjusted his stance, allowing space, trusting the instinct he could not see but could feel. And Daniel moved closer now, his voice low but steady. "Easy, boy," he said, not as a command, but as reassurance, and Rex's ears shifted again, acknowledging the voice but not fully responding, because his attention was elsewhere now, drawn by something deeper than obedience, something that had once guided him through chaos and uncertainty, and the room, which had felt calm just moments before, now held a different kind of silence, one that was not empty, but waiting, as if something unseen was about to reveal itself, and Ethan stood there, hand resting lightly against the dog, his breath steady, his posture calm, because whatever Rex sensed, whatever had stirred that quiet alertness, he trusted it, not because he understood it, but because he recognized it, the same way a man who has walked through darkness learns to trust the smallest shift in air, the faintest sound, the subtle signals that mean something is changing. And outside, the wind pressed a little harder against the walls of the building, carrying with it the cold certainty of winter drawing closer, and inside, between instinct and uncertainty, something began to build, not yet visible, not yet defined, but present all the same. The change came slowly at first, so subtle it could have been dismissed as imagination, a faint shift in the air that carried something sharper than before, something dry, almost metallic, threading its way through the quiet room like a whisper that did not belong, and Rex's body responded before any human voice could name it, his muscles tightening not in fear, but in focus, his head turning slightly toward the hallway, nostrils flaring as he drew in the scent again, deeper now, more certain. And Ethan felt it immediately through the contact at his side, the calm replaced by a quiet alertness that moved through the dog like a current, steady and undeniable. "You feel that too?" Ethan said under his breath, not as a question, but as recognition, and Rex shifted his weight forward, one step, then another, not pulling, not rushing, just moving with purpose, and Daniel followed instinctively, his training rising to meet the moment, his voice low but firm. "Stay close," he said, though he knew Ethan could not see the path ahead, only trust the presence guiding him, and they moved toward the corridor again, the air changing with each step, growing warmer in a way that did not belong to the heating system, carrying with it a faint haze that caught at the back of the throat, not enough to alarm, not yet, but enough to signal that something was not right, and the further they went, the more the building seemed to shift around them, the usual rhythm of movement replaced by something uneven, doors opening more quickly, voices rising just slightly above their normal tone, not panic, but uncertainty, and Rex's pace adjusted, no longer slow and measured, but deliberate, his steps covering more ground, his body angling slightly ahead of Ethan now, guiding with a quiet urgency that did not need to be spoken, and Ethan followed without hesitation, his cane lifting completely from the floor now, unused, because whatever Rex sensed, whatever had awakened that instinct deep within him, Ethan trusted it fully, the same way he had once trusted his own instincts in moments where hesitation meant something could be lost, and they reached the main hallway where the air thickened further, the scent now unmistakable, a trace of something burning, not open flame, not yet, but the beginning of it, the kind that starts unseen, hidden behind walls or wires, waiting until it has gathered enough strength to reveal itself, and Daniel stopped briefly, his eyes scanning the ceiling, the vents, the distant exit signs glowing faintly against the dim light, and then he saw it. Just a thin line at first, a pale ribbon of smoke curling near the far end of the corridor, almost delicate, almost easy to miss, but there, undeniable, and his voice changed, not louder, but sharper, more focused. "We need to move," he said, already stepping forward, already calculating distance, exits, the safest path through a building that was no longer entirely safe, and Rex did not wait for further instruction. He moved, his body aligning with the direction of escape, positioning himself beside Ethan once more, but closer now, more intentional, his shoulder pressing lightly against Ethan's leg as if to anchor him in place, to say without words that this path, this direction, was the one that mattered, and Ethan nodded faintly, feeling that shift, that certainty. "Lead," he said quietly, not as a command, but as trust given freely, and Rex stepped forward, guiding him through the corridor as the air grew heavier, the faint haze becoming more visible now, softening the edges of the space, turning the familiar into something uncertain, and behind them, other staff members began to move, voices calling out instructions, doors opening, the building slowly waking to the reality of what was unfolding. But in that moment, for Ethan, there was only the steady presence beside him, the measured rhythm of paws on concrete, the subtle pressure that kept him aligned, safe, moving forward without sight, and for Rex, there was only the path ahead, the instinct that had once carried him through far worse, now rising again, not as memory, but as purpose, clear and unwavering. And as they moved together through the growing haze, something undeniable took shape between them, not just connection, not just understanding, but something deeper, something that did not need to be named to be real, because in that moment, they were no longer two broken beings finding their way, they were something else entirely, something whole, moving forward into uncertainty with a quiet, unshakable resolve. The hallway narrowed as they moved, the air thickening with each step, the faint haze now visible even to those who could see, softening the edges of doors and exit signs into something uncertain, and Rex's pace did not falter, his body low but steady, guiding Ethan with a precision that no longer felt remembered, but lived, as if every instinct buried within him had risen at once and settled into place, clear and undeniable. And Ethan followed without question, his hand resting lightly against Rex's shoulder, feeling the subtle shifts, the quiet signals that replaced sight with something deeper, something earned, and behind them, Daniel's voice carried through the corridor, calm but firm, directing others toward the nearest exit, his training moving into action with practiced control. "Stay low, move toward the front, do not rush," he called, not raising his voice, because panic would do more harm than the smoke itself. And the staff responded, their movements quick but measured. Doors opening, kennels being checked, each person working through the uncertainty with a focus that came from knowing that hesitation could cost time they did not have, and somewhere deeper in the building, a faint crackling sound began to emerge, not loud, not yet, but enough to confirm what the scent had already told them, and Rex's ears flicked at the sound, his pace adjusting again, faster now. More urgent, his body pressing closer to Ethan as if to shield him from something unseen, and Ethan felt it, the change not just in movement, but in purpose. "We are running out of time," he murmured, his voice steady, not afraid, because fear would not help them find their way, and Rex responded by pulling slightly ahead, guiding him around a corner where the air grew heavier still, the warmth more pronounced now, unnatural, pressing against the skin in a way that did not belong to any season. And the floor beneath them shifted slightly, a change in texture that Ethan recognized through the soles of his boots, a transition from smooth concrete to a rougher surface near the service exit, and Rex slowed for a fraction of a second, adjusting Ethan's path just enough to avoid a metal threshold that could have caused him to stumble, and Daniel noticed that too, his eyes narrowing as he kept pace behind them. Because this was no longer instinct alone, this was guidance, precise and intentional. Something the reports had said was no longer possible, and yet here it was, unfolding in real time, undeniable, and as they neared the exit, the sound of wind pushing against the outer doors grew louder, mixing with the distant voices of others already outside, calling out, counting, ensuring no one had been left behind, and Rex hesitated for the briefest moment, his head turning back toward the interior of the building, toward the source of the crackling, the shifting air, the place where something still remained unfinished, and Ethan felt that pause, the tension that returned, not from fear, but from decision, and his hand moved slightly, resting more firmly against Rex's shoulder, grounding him. Not yet, Ethan said quietly, though he could not see what lay behind them, only trust that whatever Rex sensed, it mattered, and Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. We need to get him out first, he said, not dismissing the instinct, but prioritizing the life beside him, and Rex turned forward again, the decision made, at least for now, guiding Ethan the final meters toward the exit, each step deliberate, each movement aligned with a purpose that no longer needed explanation, and as the door pushed open and the cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, cutting through the haze like a promise, Ethan stepped out onto the gravel just beyond the threshold, the sound of small stones shifting beneath his boots grounding him in a reality that was still intact, still reachable, and Rex followed, his body remaining close, his attention still divided between the man he guided and the building behind them, where the air continued to change, where something still called to him, something he had not yet answered, and outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and frost, clean and steady, a stark contrast to the warmth and haze behind them, and for a moment, it felt like they had crossed a boundary not just of space, but of something deeper, something that separated uncertainty from clarity, and yet, as Rex stood there beside Ethan, his gaze fixed back toward the building, it was clear that their path was not finished, not yet, because some instincts do not fade when the danger passes, they wait, quiet and patient, until the moment comes when they are needed again. The cold air outside should have been enough to settle everything, to draw a clear line between danger and safety, but Rex did not relax, not fully, his body still angled toward the building, ears forward, breath steady but intent, as if the moment had not ended for him, only shifted, and Ethan sensed it immediately, the absence of release, the tension that lingered beneath the surface like something unfinished. There is still something inside, Ethan said quietly, not as a guess, but as a recognition carried through the subtle signals he had learned to trust, and Daniel stepped beside them, scanning the structure now with sharper focus, the thin smoke trailing from a side vent more visible against the pale sky, curling upward in uneven lines. We are accounting for everyone, he replied, but his voice held a trace of doubt, not because he did not trust his team, but because experience had taught him that in moments like this, certainty could be fragile, and behind them, staff members gathered at a safe distance, counting, calling names, checking off lists with gloved hands that moved just a little too quickly, while a few volunteers stood wrapped in coats, watching the building with quiet concern, the kind that comes when something familiar begins to change into something unpredictable, and Rex shifted his weight again, one step forward, then another, pulling gently this time, not away from Ethan, but toward the door they had just exited, his movement controlled but insistent, and Ethan did not resist, his hand remaining on the dog's shoulder, grounding both of them in that shared awareness. He wants to go back, Ethan said, and the words settled heavily between them, because they all understood what that meant, and Daniel shook his head instinctively. It is not safe, he said, firm now, because that was the truth he had to hold, the line he could not cross lightly. But Rex did not respond to the tone, did not retreat, his focus unwavering, fixed on something beyond human sight, something that called to a part of him that had never truly been turned off, and Ethan took a slow breath, the cold air filling his lungs, steadying him. He is not afraid, he said softly, he is certain, and Daniel looked at the dog again, really looked this time, not at the label, not at the reports, but at the posture, the control, the absence of panic, and he saw it, the difference between a dog reacting and a dog deciding, and that changed something, subtle but real, because decisions carried weight, responsibility, and trust, and for a moment, the wind moved through the clearing, lifting loose snow from the edges of the gravel, carrying it in small spirals that caught the light before settling again, and in that brief stillness, Daniel made a choice, not quickly, not easily, but with the understanding that sometimes, the safest path was not the one that avoided risk entirely, but the one that trusted the right instinct at the right moment. If we do this, we do it together, he said, his voice low but resolved, and Ethan nodded once, his hand tightening slightly on Rex's shoulder. We already are, he replied, and Rex stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, guiding them back toward the door, his movements precise, his focus clear. And as they crossed the threshold once more, the warmth returned immediately, heavier now, the air thicker, the faint haze no longer subtle but present enough to press against the senses, and the sounds inside had changed as well, the quiet replaced by a distant, uneven crackling, the kind that grows slowly, building from something small into something that demands attention, and Rex moved ahead, his body low and controlled, navigating the corridor with a certainty that did not waver, and Ethan followed without pause, his steps aligned with the rhythm beside him, trusting completely in the path he could not see, and Daniel stayed close behind, his eyes scanning, his mind calculating distance, exits, time, every detail sharpened by the knowledge that they had chosen to step back into uncertainty, and yet, there was no chaos in their movement, no panic, only purpose, quiet and focused, and as they moved deeper into the building. Once more, it became clear that whatever Rex had sensed, whatever had called him back, it was not something he would ignore, not something he would leave unfinished, because some instincts are not just about survival, they are about responsibility, the kind that does not fade with time, the kind that waits patiently until it is needed again, and in that moment, between smoke and silence, between doubt and trust, Rex was no longer the dog they had once labeled, he was something else entirely. Something that could not be reduced to a word, only understood through what he chose to do next. The air inside felt different now, heavier, as if it carried not just heat but memory, the kind that settles into walls and waits for a moment like this to rise again, and Rex moved without hesitation, his path no longer exploratory but direct, cutting through the corridor with a precision that did not belong to chance, and Ethan followed close behind, his hand steady against the dog's shoulder, trusting the rhythm they had already begun to share, while Daniel stayed just a step back, his senses sharpened, watching the subtle cues that guided them deeper into the building where the haze thickened slightly, softening the edges of doorways and turning distance into something uncertain, and the crackling sound grew clearer now, not loud, but present, a quiet reminder that time was not endless, and as they passed the row of kennels again, the dogs inside had changed too, their earlier restlessness replaced by a low, uneasy silence, some shifting in place, others pressing close to the metal bars as if sensing something beyond their understanding, and Rex slowed for a moment, his head turning toward one of the far kennels, ears lifting, body tightening just enough to signal recognition, and Ethan felt it instantly, the change in direction, the pause that was not hesitation but focus. Here, Ethan murmured, though he could not see the source, only trust the certainty in the dog's movement, and Daniel stepped forward, peering through the haze toward the kennel Rex had stopped beside, and there, in the dim light, a small figure moved, barely visible at first, a younger dog, its coat a mix of pale brown and white, pressed low against the back of the enclosure, not barking, not moving forward, just waiting in a stillness that spoke more of fear than defiance, and the latch on that kennel hung slightly askew, not fully secured, but not open either, as if it had been overlooked in the rush to clear the building, and Daniel's breath caught for a moment, not from panic, but from the realization of what could have been missed. We missed one, he said quietly, and the weight of those words settled heavily in the air, because this was exactly what Rex had sensed, exactly what had pulled him back through the smoke and uncertainty, and Ethan stepped closer, guided by the shift in Rex's body, his free hand reaching forward slowly, not touching the metal, just feeling the space, the presence on the other side. You are not alone, he said softly, his voice calm and steady, not directed at Rex this time, but at the unseen life just beyond the barrier, and Rex lowered his head slightly, his posture changing from alert to something gentler, something grounding, as if offering reassurance not through sound, but through presence, and Daniel moved quickly now, his hand steady as he adjusted the latch, pulling the kennel door open just enough to allow space, and the smaller dog hesitated, its body still pressed low, uncertain, its breath quick but quiet, caught between instinct to hide and the faint pull of safety beyond the enclosure, and Rex did not move forward, did not crowd the space, he simply remained where he was, steady and calm, creating a path without forcing it, and after a moment that stretched longer than it should, the smaller dog shifted, one step, then another, moving slowly toward the open door, drawn not by command, but by the quiet certainty in the space around it, and Ethan lowered himself slightly, one knee bending as his hand extended again, patient, waiting, and when the small dog finally crossed the threshold, its movement tentative but real, the air seemed to change again, just enough to mark the difference between what had been and what now was, and Daniel exhaled, a breath he had not realized he was holding, because this was not just a rescue, it was proof, quiet and undeniable, that the instinct they had trusted had not been misplaced, and as the crackling sound deepened somewhere beyond the walls, and the haze continued to gather, Rex turned once more toward the corridor ahead, his focus shifting back to the path outward, the task not yet complete, and Ethan rose again, guided by that same steady presence, because now there was more than one life moving with them, more than one reason to keep going, and in that moment, the line between what Rex had been labeled and what he truly was had already begun to fade, replaced by something far more certain, something that did not need to be explained, only witnessed through the choices he continued to make. The moment the smaller dog stepped free of the kennel, the air seemed to shift again, not lighter, not yet, but purposeful, as if the space itself recognized that something had been corrected, something that should not have been left behind had now been found, and Rex did not linger, his head already turning toward the corridor, ears forward, body aligned with the path outward, and Ethan rose fully, his hand steady on Rex's shoulder while his other hand hovered briefly near the smaller dog. Offering presence without pressure, "Stay close," he said softly, not as a command but as reassurance, and the younger dog responded with a tentative step forward, then another, its movements uncertain but drawn by the calm that surrounded them, and Daniel moved ahead now, his pace measured but quicker, scanning the corridor through the growing haze, the thin smoke no longer subtle, now layering the air in a way that blurred edges and carried a faint sting with each breath, and somewhere deeper. In the building the crackling sound had strengthened, still distant, still controlled, but no longer ignorable, and the urgency in their movement became clearer, not frantic, but focused, each step placed with intent, each second counted without being spoken, and Rex adjusted his position again, moving slightly ahead of Ethan, guiding him around a low obstacle near the wall, a stack of supply bins that had been shifted in the confusion, his body brushing lightly against Ethan's leg to signal the change in direction, and Ethan followed seamlessly, his trust no longer tentative but complete, his cane still unused, held loosely at his side like something he no longer needed in this moment, and the smaller dog stayed close behind, its breathing quick but steady, its steps gaining confidence with each meter they covered, and Daniel glanced back once, just enough to confirm that all three were aligned, then turned forward again, his focus narrowing on the exit ahead, the faint outline of the door visible through the haze, its green sign glowing dimly, a quiet promise of air that would not burn the throat or cloud the senses, and as they moved closer, the temperature shifted again, the warmth intensifying slightly, pressing against the skin in a way that reminded them that the situation was still changing, still unfolding beyond what they could see, and Rex did not slow his pace. Steady, his movements precise, his instincts guiding him through the shifting environment with a clarity that came from experience rather than thought, and Ethan felt it in every step, the certainty that replaced doubt, the quiet assurance that each movement forward was the right one, and as they reached the final stretch of corridor, a low beam of light cut through the haze ahead, marking the doorway, and Daniel stepped forward, pushing it open with controlled force, allowing the cold air outside to rush in once more, sharp and clean, cutting through the smoke like a line drawn between what was and what would be, and Rex guided Ethan across the threshold without hesitation, the transition from warmth to cold immediate, the gravel beneath their feet shifting slightly as they stepped out into open space, and the smaller dog followed close behind, emerging into the clear air with a quiet whine that faded quickly as it adjusted to the sudden change, and outside, the gathered staff turned toward them, relief visible in the way their shoulders lowered, in the way voices softened as they counted again, confirming what had almost been missed, and Daniel stepped out last, pulling the door closed behind him as best he could, his breath visible in the cold air as he exhaled slowly, the tension easing but not fully gone, because the building behind them still held its quiet threat, still carried the weight of what had nearly happened, and Rex stood beside Ethan, his body finally beginning to relax, the tight focus softening into something calmer, something grounded, and Ethan's hand moved gently along the side of his neck, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement, of gratitude that did not need to be spoken aloud, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause, the cold air steady, the wind moving lightly through the trees, carrying away the last traces of smoke that clung to their clothes, and in that stillness, it became clear that something had changed, not just in the outcome, but in the understanding, because what Rex had done was no longer a question of instinct or chance, it was proof, quiet and undeniable, that beneath every label, beneath every judgment written in ink, there existed something deeper, something that revealed itself only when it was truly needed, and in that moment, standing in the cold Canadian air, with frost beginning to gather along the edges of the ground, Rex was no longer the dog they had once defined, he was something far more certain, something that had chosen, without hesitation, to go back when others had gone forward, and to return with what mattered most. The cold settled in slowly, wrapping around them like a quiet reminder that they were no longer inside the danger, but not entirely free from its weight, and the gathered group stood in a loose circle near the gravel path, boots shifting lightly over the frost-touched ground as names were called again, this time slower, more certain, each voice confirming presence, each response carrying a note of relief that did not need to be spoken aloud, and Daniel moved through them with measured steps. Checking, counting, his eyes sharp but calmer now, until he reached Ethan and Rex, and for a moment he said nothing, just looked at the dog, really looked this time, not through the filter of reports or warnings, but through what had just been witnessed, and Rex stood quietly beside Ethan, his posture no longer tense, his breath steady in the cold air, a faint plume visible with each exhale, and the smaller dog lingered close behind them, no longer pressed to the ground in fear, but standing. Watching, its body still unsure but no longer alone, and Ethan lowered himself slowly, one knee touching the frozen gravel, his hand moving along Rex's neck, fingers brushing through the short coat that still carried a trace of warmth from inside. "You knew," he said softly, not as praise, not as surprise, but as something deeper, something closer to understanding, and Rex leaned slightly into the touch, not seeking it, but accepting it, the way a partner accepts something already earned, and Daniel finally spoke, his voice lower than before, stripped of authority, carrying only truth. "He made the call," he said, almost to himself, and the words held weight, because in his world, decisions like that were not given lightly, they were trained, refined, and trusted only after years of proof, and yet here it had happened without command, without structure, just instinct and choice, and one of the staff members approached, her coat pulled tightly around her, cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes still wide with what she had seen. "We have everyone now," she said quietly, and Daniel nodded once, but his attention did not leave Rex, "Not because of us," he replied, and there was no bitterness in it, only acknowledgement, and the woman followed his gaze, her expression shifting slightly as she understood what he meant, and the smaller dog stepped forward hesitantly, closing the distance between itself and Ethan, its movement careful, as if unsure it was allowed, and Ethan extended his free hand again, the same way he had before, open, patient, and the younger dog moved closer, its nose brushing lightly against his fingers, a brief contact, fragile but real, and Rex remained still, watching, not intervening, not asserting, just allowing the moment to happen, and something about that quiet acceptance carried more meaning than any command ever could, and the wind moved gently through the trees beyond the clearing, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow, clean and steady, washing away the last traces of smoke that clung faintly to their clothes, and for a moment everything seemed to settle, not completely, but enough to feel the shift, the transition from urgency to reflection, and Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. "I read every report on him," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reflective, "every incident, every failure, every note about why he could not be placed," and he paused, his gaze still fixed on Rex. "None of them mentioned this, and—" Ethan gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, his hand resting lightly on the dog's shoulder once more. "Some things are not written down," he replied, and the truth of it lingered in the space between them, simple and undeniable, and the staff began to move again, more slowly now, gathering equipment, speaking in lower tones, the tension easing but not forgotten, and in the distance, the faint sound of approaching sirens carried through the cold air, not urgent, not chaotic, just steady, a signal that help was arriving, that the situation was now being handed over to others, and Rex finally shifted his weight, his body relaxing fully for the first time since they had stepped back inside, his attention no longer divided, his purpose fulfilled, and Ethan remained beside him, his posture calm, his presence grounded, and for the first time since he had entered the rescue center, the silence around him did not feel heavy, did not press against him like something to be endured, it felt different now, softer, as if it carried something new, something that had not been there before, and though he could not see the faces around him, could not see the building behind him or the frost forming along the edges of the ground, he knew, in a way that did not require sight, that something had changed, not just in what had happened, but in what would come next, because in the quiet space between loss and recovery, between being left behind and being found again, something had begun to take root, something that did not need to be named to be real, only felt, steady and certain, like the presence beside him that had chosen, without hesitation, to return when it mattered most. The sirens arrived without urgency, their sound carried low across the frozen ground, steady and controlled, the kind that signaled response rather than chaos, and the vehicles pulled in along the gravel drive with quiet precision, tires crunching softly over the thin layer of frost as firefighters stepped out, their movements practiced, their voices calm as they assessed the situation, and Daniel moved toward them, meeting them halfway, exchanging quick, measured words that needed no repetition, while behind him the staff continued their count, their tension easing into something more grounded, something closer to relief, and Ethan remained where he was, still kneeling for a moment longer. Before rising slowly, his hand never leaving Rex, as if that point of contact had become something more than guidance, something that anchored him in a way he had not felt in a long time, and Rex stood beside him, still and composed, no longer searching, no longer listening for danger, his purpose fulfilled, yet not diminished, as if the act itself had restored something that had been taken from him long before this day. And the smaller dog lingered near Ethan's side, its earlier hesitation replaced by a quiet presence, not quite confident, but no longer afraid, and as the firefighters moved past them toward the building, their gears shifting with soft metallic sounds, the air around the group settled further, the tension that had held everything in place slowly releasing, and one of the responders paused briefly near Daniel, nodding once as he received the details, then continuing on without hesitation. Because the work ahead was clear, contained, manageable, and behind them, the wind carried the faint scent of smoke away into the trees, thinning it until it became something distant, something that no longer defined the moment, and Daniel returned after a few minutes, his step slower now, his posture less rigid, and he stopped in front of Ethan and Rex, his gaze steady, his expression thoughtful in a way that suggested something deeper than relief. "They have it under control," he said, and Ethan nodded once, the words settling into the quiet space between them, but Daniel did not move on, did not turn away, instead he looked again at Rex, as if trying to reconcile what he had known with what he had just witnessed. "I spent months trying to understand where he went wrong," he said, his voice low, reflective. Every evaluation said the same thing, that he could not be trusted in unpredictable situations, and he paused, the faintest trace of something shifting in his tone. "Today was the most unpredictable situation we have had here in years," and the implication hung there, unspoken but clear, and Ethan's hand moved gently along Rex's neck again, a quiet gesture of recognition, not praise, not ownership, just acknowledgement. "He did not go wrong," Ethan replied softly. He was waiting, and Daniel let out a slow breath, the cold air visible as it left him, because that answer, simple as it was, carried a truth he could not ignore, and one of the staff members approached then, holding a clipboard loosely at her side, though her grip had relaxed, her earlier urgency replaced by something more measured. "We will need to file a report," she said carefully, "about what happened today," and Daniel nodded, though his eyes did not leave Rex. "We will," he replied, then added after a brief pause, "but it will not read the same as the others," and the woman gave a small, uncertain smile, understanding more than she needed to say, and the smaller dog shifted closer again, brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, its presence no longer tentative but seeking, and Ethan lowered his hand once more, allowing the contact, steady and calm, while Rex remained beside him, not stepping forward, not stepping away, simply present, as if he understood that this moment was no longer about proving anything, but about what came next. And the sky above them had begun to change, the pale gray of early winter afternoon, giving way to a deeper shade as the light shifted, the kind that comes just before evening settles in, and the first few snowflakes began to fall, light and slow, drifting down without urgency, touching the ground and disappearing almost immediately, and in that quiet, with the cold air steady and the noise of the day fading into something softer, it became clear that what had happened inside the building had not ended at the door. It had carried through, changing something in each of them, but Most of all in the space between a man who had lost his sight and a dog who had lost his place, because now, neither of them stood alone, not in the way they had before, and though nothing had been said outright, no decisions made, no paths confirmed, there was already a sense of direction forming, quiet and certain, like the snowfall beginning to gather, one small piece at a time, until it became something that could not be ignored. The snowfall thickened just slightly as the minutes passed, each flake settling more deliberately now, clinging to the edges of boots, to the dark surface of Rex's coat, to the quiet stillness that had formed around them, and the rescue center stood behind like a shadow that was slowly losing its hold, no longer the center of the moment, just a place where something had happened and changed everything, and Daniel remained near Ethan, his hands resting loosely at his sides, no longer directing, no longer instructing, just present in a way that suggested he was still processing what he had seen, and the staff had begun to move in calmer patterns, some speaking softly among themselves, others checking equipment or offering quiet reassurance to the animals now gathered outside, and the smaller dog that Rex had led them back for stayed close to Ethan. Not touching constantly, but never drifting far, as if some invisible line had already been drawn between them, and Ethan stood still, listening not just to the voices around him, but to the absence of something heavier, the absence of that suffocating silence that had once followed him everywhere, and Rex remained at his side, steady and grounded, his presence no longer marked by tension or alertness, but by something quieter, something settled, like a task completed without needing acknowledgement, and Daniel finally spoke again, his voice carrying a tone that had shifted from authority to something closer to respect. "There is a process for placement," he said, not as a barrier, but as a truth that needed to be acknowledged, and Ethan nodded slightly, his hand resting once more along the side of Rex's neck, fingers brushing through the short fur where a few snowflakes had gathered. "I understand," he replied, and his voice carried no urgency, no demand, just a calm certainty that did not push forward but did not retreat either, and Daniel took a slow breath, the cold air filling his lungs, as if he needed it to steady his thoughts. "But there is also judgment," he added after a moment, "and sometimes, that matters more than the process," and the words settled between them, quiet but significant, because they suggested something that had not been there before, a willingness to see beyond what had been written, beyond what had been decided long ago, and one of the staff members approached again, this time without a clipboard, her hands empty, her posture relaxed. "The vet has checked him over," she said gently, glancing at Rex. "No injuries, just a little smoke exposure. He will be fine," and Ethan's hand paused briefly, then resumed its quiet movement, as if that confirmation had removed the last unspoken concern, and Rex did not react to the words. Did not seek attention or reassurance, he simply remained where he was, steady, composed, as if the idea of being examined or evaluated no longer held the same weight it once had, because something more important had already been decided in a way that could not be undone, and the smaller dog shifted closer again, pressing lightly against Ethan's leg this time, no longer hesitant, and Ethan lowered his hand to meet it, his touch just as calm, just as patient, and for a moment, he stood there. Between the two of them, one hand resting on Rex, the other extended toward the smaller dog, and the space around him felt different, not empty, not heavy, but full in a quiet, grounded way that did not overwhelm, and Daniel watched that moment carefully, his gaze moving from one to the other, and something in his expression softened further. "He chose you," he said finally, not as a conclusion, but as an observation that carried weight, and Ethan gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that does not come easily. "No," he replied softly, "we recognized each other," and the difference between those two ideas lingered in the air, subtle but profound, because choice can be one-sided, but recognition is shared, and the snow continued to fall, covering the ground in a thin, even layer, softening the edges of everything it touched, turning the gravel into something quieter, something less defined, and in that stillness, the path ahead did not need to be announced or decided in words. It was already there, forming quietly beneath their feet, not measured in distance or direction, but in something far more certain, something that had already begun to take shape the moment one had reached out and the other had not pulled away. The light began to fade earlier than expected, the way it often does in late autumn across the northern provinces, where afternoon slips quietly into evening without ceremony, and the sky above the rescue center turned a deeper shade of gray, the snowfall now steady enough to soften every edge, every sound, every footprint left behind on the gravel path, and the world seemed to settle into a slower rhythm, as if acknowledging that something important had already happened, something that did not need to be repeated or explained, only carried forward, and Ethan stood there, feeling the shift not through sight, but through the way the air cooled slightly, the way voices around him lowered, the way the space between moments stretched just a little longer, and Rex remained at his side, unmoving but not rigid, his presence grounded, his breathing steady, as if the urgency that had driven him earlier had given way to something quieter, something more enduring, and Daniel stepped closer once more, his posture no longer guarded, his hands relaxed, and for a moment he said nothing, as if choosing his words with care. There are protocols, he began, his voice calm, measured, evaluations, retraining, assessments that take weeks, sometimes months, and Ethan listened without interrupting, his hand resting lightly on Rex, not holding, not directing, just present, and Daniel continued, but what we saw today does not fit inside those timelines, and there was no resistance in his tone, no attempt to justify the system, only an acknowledgement that something had shifted beyond it. And a quiet pause followed, filled only by the soft sound of snow settling against coats and shoulders, and the distant murmur of firefighters finishing their work, and then Daniel took a slow breath. I am not asking you to wait, he said, and the words landed with a quiet weight, not dramatic, not rushed, but certain, and Ethan's fingers stilled for a moment against Rex's neck, as if absorbing what had just been offered, and the smaller dog beside him shifted slightly, pressing closer again, as if sensing the change without understanding its meaning, and Ethan lowered his other hand to rest gently against its back, acknowledging its presence, not excluding it from the moment, and Daniel nodded once, a small, deliberate gesture. He will need time to adjust, he added, glancing at Rex, but not in the way we thought before, and Ethan gave a faint nod in return, his expression calm, his posture unchanged, but something within it had settled, something that no longer questioned what came next, and the staff nearby had grown quieter, their movements slower, more respectful of the moment unfolding, as if they understood that this was not just another placement, not just another decision to be filed and recorded, but something that carried meaning beyond procedure, and one of them stepped forward briefly, offering a simple leash, not with urgency, not with instruction, just an option, and Ethan reached for it, his fingers brushing the material before taking hold, and Rex did not resist as it was gently clipped into place, not because he was being controlled, but because he did not need to resist, the connection between them already defined in a way that no strap could replace, and the smaller dog watched from close by, its posture calm but attentive, as if learning something from the exchange, something it would carry forward in its own time. And the snow continued to fall, covering the ground more completely now, each step leaving a clearer mark, each movement recorded briefly before being softened again, and Ethan took a single step forward, then another, testing the alignment, the rhythm, and Rex moved with him without hesitation, adjusting naturally, his pace matched, his position precise, and for the first time, the movement felt not like guidance being given, but like something shared, something balanced between them. And Daniel watched them for a moment longer, his expression quiet, almost reflective, before stepping back, allowing space where it was needed, because some journeys begin not with instruction, but with a simple step taken in trust, and as Ethan and Rex moved slowly across the snow-covered ground, the sound beneath their feet softened, the world around them quiet and steady, it became clear that what had begun inside the walls of the rescue center was not ending here, it was continuing, unfolding one step at a time, carried not by obligation or expectation, but by something far more certain, something that had already proven itself when it mattered most, and now only needed to be lived. The snow continued to fall in quiet persistence, layering the ground in a soft, unbroken white that muted every sound, every step, until even the distant voices faded into something gentle and far away, and Ethan walked slowly along the edge of the rescue center grounds, his pace steady, measured not by sight but by the presence beside him, and Rex moved in perfect alignment, the leash resting loosely between them, not guiding, not pulling, simply there, a symbol more than a necessity, because the connection they carried no longer depended on anything external, and the smaller dog lingered near the entrance, watching them go, not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with something quieter, something that suggested it had witnessed enough to understand that it, too, had been given a Second beginning, and Daniel remained where he stood, his figure growing still against the fading light, hands tucked into his coat as he observed without calling them back, without adding anything more, because there was nothing left to instruct, nothing left to correct, only something to respect, and the sky darkened gradually, the last trace of daylight slipping behind the line of trees, leaving behind a soft, even glow that reflected off the snow, illuminating the path just enough for shapes to exist without definition, and Ethan lifted his head slightly, feeling the shift in the air, the way the cold settled deeper as evening approached, and for the first time in a long while, the darkness around him did not feel like something that took away, it felt like something that held, something that allowed space without pressure, and Rex stayed close, his steps quiet, his body relaxed but attentive, not searching for danger, not reacting to the world, but moving with it, as if he had finally found a place where his instincts did not need to be questioned, where they could exist without conflict, and Ethan's hand moved once more along the side of Rex's neck, a gesture that had become familiar, not out of habit, but out of recognition, and there was no need for words between them, no need for commands or reassurance, because everything that needed to be understood had already been proven, not in comfort, but in the moment when turning back had meant something, and as they reached the edge of the path where the gravel gave way to a quieter stretch of snow-covered ground, Ethan paused, not from uncertainty, but from awareness, as if marking the moment without needing to name it, and Rex stopped with him, his posture calm, his breath steady in the cold air, and for a few seconds, they stood there in stillness, the world around them silent except for the soft whisper of falling snow. And Ethan lowered his head slightly, his forehead resting gently against Rex's, a simple contact, brief but full of meaning, and in that quiet gesture, there was no need to explain what had been lost, no need to define what had been found, only an acknowledgement that something had shifted in a way that would not return to what it had been before, and when he straightened again, his posture carried something different, not just steadiness, but direction, and he took another step forward, then another, and Rex moved with him, not leading, not following, but walking beside him in a way that felt equal, balanced, and certain, and behind them, the rescue center faded into the distance, its lights soft against the darkening sky, no longer the place where something had gone wrong, but the place where something had been made right, and the path ahead stretched quietly into the evening, unmarked, undefined, but no longer uncertain, because even without sight, even without certainty of what lay beyond the next step, Ethan no longer walked alone, and Rex no longer waited to be understood, and somewhere between those two truths, something lasting had formed, something that did not need to be named, only lived, one step at a time, in the quiet grace of a bond that had chosen to exist when it mattered most.